You're now live. You can go ahead.
Can we make a start then? Have we got people here? Do you know if we got everybody here? Okay. I'll just make a start then. So thanks to everyone for taking the time out to attend this meeting today. Apologies that it's online. We would have liked to have had a face-to-face meeting, but unfortunately because of the COVID situation, we are not able to do that. I'd also like to apologise that it's taken us just over a month to have this meeting, but I'm sure you can appreciate that we've had quite a big impact right across the Perth and Kinross area. So there are a number of properties, a number of areas that have been affected. My name is Mark Butterworth. I'm Head of Environment and Consumer Services at Perth and Kinross Council. I've got a number of colleagues with me today from various organisations, Scottish Water, SEPA, the Fire and Rescue Service, and a number of colleagues from the council. I won't do any introductions or ask people to do introductions because it will take quite a while to do that, but hopefully as people are requested to or come in as part of the presentation, they will introduce themselves. Yes, so we have a presentation in terms of the format of the meeting tonight. We're going to have a presentation for about 20 minutes or so, and we hope that, and I'm sure you will have a number of questions and comments to make. If people can put them in the chat or in the question and answer facility along the right hand side, then we will be able to pick them up during the presentation, and hopefully we will take them after the presentation has been completed. We really hope that it's a helpful meeting tonight, but if people do want further discussions or want a further meeting, we can arrange that as well. But again, if you can put that in the chat at the side. So hopefully we are ready to go, and I'll just hand over to Peter Dixon now, who will take us through the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. I'm Peter Dixon. I'm the Senior Engineer with Perth Cross Council's flooding team. And just to start us off, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the storm that happened on the night of 11th and 12th August and give you an idea of the impact that it had throughout the Perth and Cross Council area. So during that night, much of Scotland was affected by significant thunderstorms and heavy rainfall. And the entire Perth and Cross Council area suffered extensive rainfall, thunder and lightning for 6 hours from around 11 PM on the 11th of August. The flooding affected approximately 190 properties in some parts of Perth, as well as Alyth, Kinross, Dunning, Pitlochry and other places. In Perth itself, the Met Office confirmed that the majority of the rain came between midnight and 3 AM, with 42 millimetres of rain falling between 1 and 2 AM. The total rainfall in Perth was 86.4 millimetres for the 24-hour period from 6 AM on the 11th to 6 AM on the 12th. And Met Office climate data indicates that Perth would normally experience an average of 65 millimetres of rain for the whole month of August. So 42 millimetres an hour is therefore exceptional and confirms that the storm was significant. Initial rainfall analysis by SEPA has confirmed this. Flooding impacts were experienced across a widespread area of central and northeast Scotland, and SEPA are preparing a comprehensive report of the event, which will be published when complete. So I'm just going to hand over now to colleagues in Scottish Water. If they can give us a little bit about the flood mechanism in the sort of Feus Roads area. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I'll be relatively brief at this stage. We'll probably return to these issues in further detail as the meeting goes on. As Peter's comments have already reflected, the primary mechanism of flooding, the primary cause of the flooding in this instance was a highly exceptional intensity and volume of rainfall over a period of time. We do know, because of through the work that's taken place in relation to the drainage networks in Perth in more detail about the particular circumstances of Feus Road that have made it historically prone to flooding, even in less exceptional weather events than this. And that really reflects that in combination, the drainage infrastructure serving the area is not sufficient and includes constraint in the sewer network for which Scottish Water is responsible, but also factors that are linked to open and culverted watercourses in the area, and indeed to the overland topography of the ground in the surrounding area. So there are a number of contributing factors. There are also a number of restrictions that we have to work within in looking for solutions, and we'll come to that a bit later in the meeting.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Just going to move on to invite a few people to input just with regard to the sort of initial operational response to the flooding on the night and into the day on the 12th. And hopefully we've got Stuart Doll, I think, from the Council's Road Maze Partnership to talk about that first. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, my team provide the operational reactive response to emergencies within Perth and Ross Council, which includes flooding responses. We have Aberdeen City Council take all our out of hours calls, and they then pass these calls to a standby roads officer who's available to react to these calls. Obviously, in an event such as we had on the 11th and the 12th, we have 2 officers available to take these calls, but they also then have to initiate a response, an inspection on some occasions, and initiate a response utilising our colleagues in Tayside Contracts. We had 2 Tayside Contracts road workers in Perth and 2 Tayside Contracts road workers in Blairgowrie on standby, and they were called out around about 2:30 when the event obviously escalated to a stage where the local guy in Perth felt he needed that level of assistance. He also called 2 colleagues out at 3 o'clock, and I was called out at 4 o'clock to assist and try and manage the situation that had developed within Perth and the surrounding area. I was at Feus Road at 5:30 in the morning. I think I was the first roads officer there. We have no records of any calls having gotten through to our standby officer, but that's not to say none of the calls got through to Aberdeen call handling service. Through the course of the 5-hour period, the 6-hour period, they had 219 calls they answered and 267 calls that they were unable to answer, and that was despite the fact that 7 call handlers working within within the unit. So my apologies if you tried to call and never got a response, but they were exceptionally busy for the duration of the event. When I got to Feus Road, it was around about 5:30. There was one resident out in the street trying to prevent traffic coming through, because despite I think it was residents putting signs up at either end, the traffic was still coming through, and that was to some degree creating a bow wave. There was also a resident pumping out their own property in Church Street. I parked my car across Church Street to try and mitigate the traffic getting through from that area, and we had a road worker that was putting cones around the blown manhole covers on Creef Road. So once he'd made these secure, I got him to go around and improve the signage and the coning at each end of Feus Road to prevent the vehicles coming along. I left there round about. I spoke to the couple of residents over there. I left there and went and did other things, and spoke to Scottish Water around 10 AM. And I then headed back to Feus Road again, and at the same time as I got there, the large Vector was arriving. We went up the street. There was a lorry that was parked across Feus Road to prevent vehicles trying to get through, and I think that was quite beneficial, because again it reduced the bow wave effect. And around 11:15ish, the drains started, the sewers started, the capacity returned to the sewers, and the water started to drain away. When I'd arrived, the lorry was sitting fully in water, and when I left around 12:15, the water was clear of the vehicle, and that was an indication that the water was starting to drop back. I was back again about 4 o'clock. Many of the residents were out pumping out water from their premises, and obviously the water had all gone from the road at that point, and the road was reopened. So that was my observation from the event.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Just going to ask Gavin Steele again from Scottish Water, just to give us a little bit on Scottish Water's response on the day. Thank you. I think you're muted, Gavin.
Apologies, thanks, Peter. I'm conscious I didn't introduce myself the last time I spoke, so I'm Scottish Water's Corporate Affairs Manager for the North of Scotland. Our sewer response manager sends his apologies. He'd hoped to be able to be on the call this evening, but another commitment came up. But he's provided me with a readout of his team's involvement in the response. Firstly, to pick up one point that I can see has been raised in a question, the alarm that we have monitoring water levels within the sewer in Feus Road did work as intended and generated an alarm just before 10 to 1 on the morning of the 12th of August. Unfortunately, the data we have from that tells us that just before 5 to 1 flooding then occurred. So in this instance, the alarm only gave us 6 minutes warning that flooding was taking place, which clearly was not sufficient to get resources to the site before that happened. In response to the alarm, as many of the residents will know, we have a response plan in place for Feus Road. It's one of 2 locations in Perth that has the highest priority for flooding response that we have, and therefore the alarm triggered an urgent job for a network maintenance operator to be sent to the site. Unfortunately, in the context of this particular weather event, the network operator and also the tanker that was dispatched at that time as well encountered difficulty getting to the site because of flooding impacts on the road network at other locations, and therefore they were redirected in the short term to deal with other tasks that they were able to access during that immediate period. As has been reflected, resources got to Feus Road later in the day. In the context of the volumes of water concerned on this occasion, it's unlikely that a tanker attending would have made a consequential difference in the worst of the flooding, but that's the story of what happened in terms of the alarm and the immediate operational response. Moving on into the following days after the flood water had receded, Stuart's referred to the sort of efforts that residents were making to pump out water from their homes. A team of colleagues called on all of the residents who were at home. I think it was towards the end of the week, over Thursday and Friday of the week when flooding had occurred, and they arranged where they were able to speak to residents for a contractor to attend and assist with clean-up within houses and gardens as well. I think that work for the most part went ahead over the following weekend, and there was then follow-up with some residents later who weren't at home, having been relocated following the flooding.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Now, next, we were going to move on to the police, but unfortunately, they've not got anyone on the call tonight. They have sent a little bit of information in, which I'll read out. I know there's been issues and concerns raised in the past in Feus Road about road closures and getting them on quickly enough because of the water lying on the road, and then vehicles moving through that, creating the kind of bow wave effect, which suddenly makes the flooding in residential properties a lot worse. So just a quick bit of information on that. Only really the police have the legal power to close roads. They can put road closure signs in place. The council roads department can do that as well, but the police basically point out the difficulty is that unless a police officer or other personnel is left at the closure, what you tend to find happen is that the travelling public might just ignore the signs that are put up, and that can happen for various reasons. Can be residents returning or leaving the street for work or other reasons. Same with family and friends to assist others in the street. People might think the signs should have been removed and have been left there by mistake. Often the emergency services and council officials using the route when the road is closed can cause the problem itself as well. And you can't get the public service buses and delivery vehicles and lorries, as this is the most suitable access road to be used, and that may be done under the convoy. So it is difficult, it is complicated, and with such a wide-ranging flood going on and a wide-ranging storm, getting everybody out and getting the police out quickly enough to close the road can always be an issue, because the public authorities are trying to deliver a response across quite a wide area. So it is always a tricky one, but it's one we try and do our best with. So move on to the next one. I think we've got hopefully Mike Rumgay from the fire service on the call. I'll just try and invite Mike to give us a little update on the fire service response if he could. Thanks, Mike.
Hi Peter, hi everybody. My name is Mike Rumgay. I'm the station commander at Perth Fire Station. I was the on-call officer for that evening from the 11th into the 12th. So the fire control in Dundee started to receive the first sort of calls from the Feus Road area just the back of 2, and they've sent a first appliance along, and they basically indicated that the whole of Feus Road at that point was flooded from one end to the other. They went and assessed what was happening there at that time. Although the water levels were increasing, there was no immediate risk to life, if you want to call it that. And just to give you a bit of sort of background to how we were dealing with incidents sort of on the 11th into the 12th. Because we would be back up Fife. Fife obviously were hit with the storm prior to it travelling into Tayside. So about back at 10, 11 o'clock, all the Perth appliances were sent down to Fife to help with the operations down there, and there was crews sent up from Dundee and locally from Auchterarder and Crieff were sent in to backfill for the Perth appliances leaving. So it was a really challenging night for us. Volume of calls we received was locally, there's about 700 calls. Nationally, it was 2,000. For 8 people working in the control room, obviously they were overwhelmed at the time, so it was a case of prioritising calls, and what we were going to do mainly was life risk at that time. Obviously, with what was happening in Feus Road was being replicated in other areas across the city and surrounding areas. So control were having to take that sort of tough decision to decide where they were going to deploy the resources to the most needy. At that time, then mobilised myself and other officers to go to various locations within Perth to make an assessment as to what we could do to help, if we could do anything at that time. Because as you know, the main issue at the time was the volume of water that was coming down in the rain and then through the drains, and obviously that was causing issues with drain covers lifting and the streets starting to flood really quite quickly. So we worked through the night into the sort of daytime. We started, I think other appliances attended to inspect other premises throughout the day in obviously the Feus Road and the Fairfield area of Perth, also swinging around into sort of to Wallace Crescent area too. I think later on in the day we deployed an appliance along and they started pumping operations, because as was highlighted earlier by yourselves, that the water levels in the road had receded that much that if we were going to pump anything out at all, we could pump it into the street and then into the drains that way. But at the time when everything was kind of kicking off at the back of 2 o'clock, there had been no place for the water to be pumped at that time. You'd just been pushing it around the street. Obviously nationally, we had quite a major incident at Dunning with a farm fire which kicked off at back at 5 o'clock. Then that obviously with the train crash up north, which depleted a lot of resources locally. They were sent up to that Stonehaven area to help with that incident up there. And we had lunchtime, we had Clydebank were standing by at Perth Fire Station, and we had Paisley standing by in Dundee. Now, if you think how many fire stations there are between Perth and Clydebank, you can maybe understand the sort of volume of calls that the fire service were dealing with that night, right across the sort of central belt into Fife, that we had to rely on an appliance from Clydebank to come up and help out in Perth. As conditions improved throughout the day, we were starting to go along and be able to respond to certain incidents around Perth that had been sort of parked by the control room as not being high risk, and hopefully we're able to get to everybody that required assistance from us in that day, which was a really challenging day for all of us, I'm sure. That's it from me at this point, unless you've got any questions.
We'll come to him at the end, I think, Mike. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Can we have the next slide, please, chaps? Great stuff. There we go. Now, we had invited Carol Rayburn from the Scottish Flood Forum to come on the call, but I don't think she's made it in. So I'll just give a very brief bit of information from them. I think I'm right in saying the Scottish Flood Forum have certainly been in Perth, and I'm sure there's a number of residents from the from the Feus Road area in particular have met with the Scottish Flood Forum already and have received some initial advice. So Scottish Flood Forum are a small organisation. They are a sort of registered charity to help and advise people deal with and recover from flooding. They are a key liaison at this time. They do help people recover from flooding and help them become more resilient to its impact in the future. They can provide advice on things like property insurance. That's one issue that they can advise you on, as well as making your property more resilient to flooding in the future. And there are a lot of products on the market that help with that. Things like air brick covers, door guards, non-return valves and the like, and they can carry out property surveys upon request and advise residents about that. They also help community resilience groups, so if there's any interest in the area in setting a group up, the Scottish Flood Forum can help with that, and often find that the residents can group together and help each other become more resilient to the effects of flooding in the future. From that, you're staying with me, I'm afraid, because SEPA were meant to give an update as well. Now, Karen Bloodworth was going to try and be on the call, but unfortunately she hasn't made it. So Karen has sent me an update, which I'll read out as well. So this is from SEPA. So the Scottish Flood Forecasting Service is provided in partnership with SEPA and the Met Office. The service provides a daily national flood guidance statement, which is issued to Category 1 and Category 2 agencies, including local authorities and emergency responders, and provides an assessment of the risk of flooding for the next 5 days. The Scottish Flood Forecasting Service also supports SEPA's Floodline service, which provides live flooding information and advice on how to prepare or cope with impacts of flooding 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For those registered with Floodline, they can receive flood messages for an area of interest direct to their phone. Now, with regard to the flood event on the 11th to 12th of August, SEPA issued a flood alert for Tayside on the 10th of August, highlighting the risk of heavy thundery showers, which may result in flooding impacts from surface water and small watercourses. The flood alert was updated over the following days when further information was available. Due to difficulty in forecasting intense summer thunderstorms in terms of location and timings, SEPA are unable to provide specific location information where the impacts may occur, and therefore the risk of flooding impacts from these storms is highlighted across a larger regional area. And I know certainly that was the case in advance of the storm on the 12th of August. SEPA made a commitment to explore and trial available approaches to surface water flood forecasting and hope to make developments in this over the coming years. SEPA have undertaken a post-flood analysis looking at rain gauges in the network where available, and the rainfall measured in Perth confirms that this was an extreme flood event with nearly a month's rainfall within 12 hours. SEPA are currently producing a national report on the flood event, and this will be made publicly available in the coming weeks. So if anyone would like more information on Floodline, you can visit SEPA's website and contact SEPA via their website as well. So that either via SEPA's own website or the floodlinescotland.org.uk website. And I think the links to these websites are all in the council's frequently asked questions if you need that. If anyone's struggling to get those, just pop your questions in the chat box and we'll try and get them to you. So next, I think we're going to move on to talk about the Perth Integrated Catchment Study. If I could maybe ask Gavin Steele from Scottish Water to talk about that again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Peter. Apologies, I'll get the hang of unmuting myself one of these times. Just to mention, my colleagues Grant Vanson and Annalise McMillan from our flooding team are on the line as well, so they may be able to help with more detailed points, but I'll give a bit of an overview. So under the framework of the Flood Risk Management Act, there is a sort of mechanism available reflecting the complex causes of flooding, which we've touched on already, and enabling joint working between the different public agencies that have responsibilities in this area, particularly between local authorities and Scottish Water. One of the things which has taken place in relation to under that framework, specifically for Perth and also covering Luncarty and Bridgevern, is a piece of work called an Integrated Catchment Study, which is quite a complex and detailed piece of work to really give a much more accurate understanding of how all the different drainage networks, the combined sewers, open and culverted watercourses, and indeed overland flows interact with each other. Just to give some measure, I'm conscious some residents who will be more aware than others potentially of that work that's been taking place, but in order to capture the information that feeds into that model, river surveys were carried out within the area at 518 locations. Surveys took place at 829 sewer manholes spread throughout the catchment, and 13 kilometres of underground CCTV survey was carried out as well within sewers and culverted watercourses. So it's really all about trying to understand the drainage networks in more detail than was previously the case, and the way in which they all interact under a variety of different weather conditions. So the modelling phase of that work was completed in December 2019, and that now provides a foundation for work to take place focused on the localities that are identified within the model that are most at risk of flooding. It's perhaps worth saying that Perth was one of 17 areas within Scotland that were prioritised for this integrated catchment study to be carried out, particularly reflecting the complex interactions between the different drainage systems and the contribution that they make to flooding problems within the area. So moving on from that initial work, Feus Road in particular, together with one other location within the city, were identified as being the highest priorities for the next phase of work, leading on to the development of potential solutions. So there is currently work going on. We have a project team at the moment developing options in order to have an outline design proposal for a preferred option by February 2021. There's a cyclical funding process for funding flooding interventions that the Scottish Government maintains. So the focus of that work is particularly to enable, we're coming to the end of the first cycle of investment under the flood risk management arrangements. That February 2021 date is seeking to enable the council to seek funding through the Scottish Government in order to be able to implement a solution in the second phase of that framework, which runs from 2021 to 27. So we're not yet in a position to say what the exact shape of the solution will be. We do know, as I mentioned earlier, that we have a number of constraints to work within at Feus Road. One is the railway line, but also just the nature of a relatively central urban area. There are limited options in terms of where water can be redirected. It's likely that a solution will involve significant and it's perhaps worth acknowledging potentially quite disruptive engineering work, and will consist of some combination of underground storage to accommodate stormwater flows, above ground attenuation of water, and indeed removal of surface water, which as far as possible is something we're keen to explore, albeit where surface water flows from paved areas and roofs can be disconnected from the combined sewer. There does of course have to be somewhere else that water can be managed. So the design work, as I've mentioned, is ongoing in the background there, but we are further towards having an option for Feus Road than many other places in Scotland, reflecting the priority it's been given, and we certainly hope around the turn of the year that we'll have a better idea of what the options will be, and be in a position to provide an update on that work.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. Now I was just going to talk a little bit about kind of the future, which you have kind of mentioned, Gavin, in the talking about the integrated catchment study, and also the council's current flood risk management plans. So we have had flood risk management plans published in 2016. SEPA published what's known as flood risk management strategies. They were published in December 2015, and local authorities followed on with local flood risk management plans in June 2016. So we've had these for a while now. The plans have been undergoing a review with a view to publishing new plans for the second cycle of flood risk management planning, and that will be June 2022 that the councils will publish those. But in advance of that, the draft plans will be subject to public consultation next year. So there will be further information for residents on that at that time. And then just to move on, just before we finish, just to quickly touch on ongoing communication arrangements. The council and Scottish Water and the Flood Forum have received quite a high volume of correspondence following the flooding on 12th of August. So just apologies to any residents who haven't received a response yet. We've had to prioritise all of these calls. I know one team are trying to manage over 400 inquiries at the moment, and we're still working our way through those. We have set up a generic email address for all flood-related inquiries, and that will be on the next slide on the presentation. We'll put that up in a minute. We also have an August 2020 flooding webpage, which again the link to that will be up on the next slide, and all information will be published there. We have been putting out community bulletins. There is one out for Feus Road, along with some frequently asked questions and answers to those, and a general flood bulletin for the whole Perth and Cross Council area, and they're on the council's webpage right now as we speak. There will be further bulletins and updates on that, and as well as an opportunity for further meetings if need be upon request after this tonight. So having said that, I'll just hand back to Mark Butterworth now, just to round things up. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks, colleagues, for your input into the presentation. There are quite a few questions in the chat, so what I'll try to do is I'll go through them one by one, and Peter, if you can help me out in terms of who's the best person to respond to the question. I think also maybe we may not be able to answer all the questions tonight, so if that's the case, we'll certainly get an answer back to the people who have asked that question. So I'll start off with Mrs. Garvey, I think it is, and her question is, Can you tell me why I was told the alarm went off in Feus Road but was ignored because of other water issues around?
I think that's probably one for me, Mark.
Thanks, Gavin.
Just as I touched on a bit earlier, the alarm did go off in Feus Road as is part of our response plan. Unfortunately, it went off a very short time before flooding actually occurred, reflecting the intensity of the rainfall on this occasion. Just as other agencies have reflected, our contact centre was receiving an extremely high number of calls at the time while these incidents were ongoing, and I can only apologise to Mrs. Garvey if the information given out to her wasn't complete. But the alarm was not ignored. The alarm had the intended effect that it generated an operational response, both in terms of one of my colleagues trying to get to Feus Road immediately and in terms of a tanker being dispatched. The speed of that response was not as fast as we would have wanted it to be because of issues getting road access to the site, and that may be what's been reflected in the conversation that's been had with our contact centre on this occasion, that because the resources weren't able to get to Feus Road, it was felt to be more productive to send them to other urgent calls that they were able to access. And they then attended Feus Road later.
Thanks, Gavin. I'll just move on then to Mr. Longhorn. His question is: the agreed local response to flooding in the Feus Road is for the road to be closed. This took several hours and no service was aware of this response plan. In this time, flooding was exacerbated by irresponsible driving. What guarantee can be given that any future events will be managed properly? In terms of road closure, would that be one for the police, Peter, or can anyone else make an attempt to answer the question?
I'll come in if you want, Mark. It's Stuart here.
Thanks, Stuart.
Whilst Peter was confirming that only the police can legally close the road, we did have at the time one officer out on the network. He was dealing with issues around Queen's Avenue, Marshall Place, and he called out another colleague. Obviously, by the time we called out the other colleague, there were road closed signs at the end of Feus Road, and we're assuming that the residents put them out themselves, because I know from the previous flood that a resident who's now moved was given road closed signs. On the basis that there was a road closed sign at each end, and the fact that we had numerous other calls and requests, we didn't enhance the road closure. We just expected people to comply with it. And it wasn't until 5:30, as I said earlier, when I was out on Feus Road, and I diverted one of our road workers from making safe the manholes on Creef Road that had blown and were covered in water, so weren't obvious to the public, that were starting to move about at that time in the morning. Once he'd finished coning off and making these blown manholes obvious, we moved round and we increased the road closure signage and things at each end of Feus Road to prevent it throughout the course of the day.
Thanks, Stuart. Just moving on into Councillor Rebeck's questions. He's got two there. The first one is in relation to the road closure and the question around, could this have been quicker, or can we make this quicker and more comprehensive? Have you got any comments to add around that at all? Because it seems to me that part of the issue was the road, the people were still using the road, and there was that ripple effect of the water going into properties.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if the resident Mrs. Garvey said that she was out on the road, and it's maybe Mrs. Garvey I spoke to when I was down there, but she was making a valiant attempt to prevent it. I think the majority of the people doing it tended to be driving white transit vans, without picking on white transit vans. Did tend to be, there were very few private vehicles, because a car wouldn't have got through, so it was the larger vehicles that were ignoring the signage. I think the combination of us putting the additional signage out at each end and on Church Street, which prevented them taking the shortcut down there, as well as the lorry that Mrs. Garvey asked to straddle the road. I think that had the effect, desired effect anyway. Without having an extremely large commitment of people working or on standby overnight, it is difficult to get there any quicker. Whilst we're a first responder in terms of emergency planning, we're not actually an emergency service. So the fire service have intimated they were extremely stretched with a full shift on. We don't have a full shift on. We have a couple of standby guys that actually work during the day, are available overnight and do what they need to do, and then work the next day. Obviously, on this occasion, the guys that were out through the night weren't working the next day, so we kind of lose them for that following day. So it's difficult to guarantee that we could put a road closure in place any quicker than was done. Although I appreciate the residents who I think it was put up the road close signs acted themselves.
Okay, thanks for that, Stuart. In terms of the second question, I think this is one for you, Gavin, and it's in relation to the reliability of the alarm system, which the suggestions worked in the past but didn't work this time. But I think you're saying it did work this time, didn't it?
Yes, no, that's right. The alarm did operate as intended. It was the practical circumstances of this incident that made an immediate response on the ground not follow as quickly after that as we would have wished. It's worth saying, we do look at these alarms and what we can do to improve the way they inform us in real time what's going on the network. One of the issues I think with the alarms we have at the moment is that they alert us as the water level rises and when flooding occurs, but once they're submerged, they're then not able to continue communicating with us. And I know we're looking at whether we can get alarms that will continue to inform us where flooding episodes are more prolonged and therefore there's continuing urgent need for assistance.
Okay, thanks, Gavin.
Can I just add as well, Mark? Sorry, before we finish that question, I know we're talking a lot about the kind of external factors, about the road being closed and alarms, but there are things that residents can do themselves to protect their own properties. If the Flood Forum had made it on the call tonight, they would advise on that. And it's action you can take, independent of all that external stuff to protect your own property. So you can fit a very simple door guard to your front door and it will stop the water coming in, very quick and effective to fit. You can get an air brick cover if you get the water coming through your air bricks. You can just keep your own little supply of sandbags in your back garden and just have them ready to go. Sandbags can be heavy and a bit unwieldy, not good for your back, but you can get products in the market now, flood sacks and the like, which are synthetic sandbags. Once you get them a little bit wet, you can activate them, and they're very lightweight to deploy and put out. And again, you can have a few of them sitting in your shed, ready to go. And it just means you're a little bit more resilient to flooding when it does happen, because you do live in a flood area. You're probably aware of the flood risk, so get ready for it. That's the general advice we would give. I know SEPA give the general advice, which is in the council's frequently asked questions about signing up to floodline and get some advance warning of these things and getting ready for flooding. And it just maybe give residents a bit more comfort that there's things they can do themselves quickly to try and mitigate the effects of flooding.
Right, thanks, Peter. Is that advice gone out, or where can people get that advice? Is it available on the Scottish Flood Forum's website, is it?
Yeah, you'll get it on the council's website, Scottish Flood Forum's website. I'm sure even Scottish Water have got links to that kind of thing as well. It's within our frequently asked questions that have been sent out to all residents as well. So there's plenty of advice out there.
Great, thanks, Peter. Okay, can I just ask a question? Is there an alarm in Crieff Road?
There's not an alarm in Crieff Road. We only install these alarms in areas that are particularly susceptible to flooding, and essentially we would aim to put them at the lowest point on the network where flooding would occur first. So in this particular locality, I think it will be the case that flooding would always occur first at Feus Road. And so that's where the alarm's located in order to generate a response. Although in more severe flood incidents like this one, we appreciate that residents in surrounding streets were affected too.
Thanks, Gavin. Just moving down to a question from 32 Feus Road. The severe weather event was predicted. Why was preemptive action not taken to prepare for this outcome? I think you might have picked this up in your presentation, Peter, that it wasn't really predicted. Is that right? Certainly not to the extent that we received it.
That's correct, Mark. Yeah, I think there were weather warnings out, and the SEPA's update that we get, the 5-day update, did indicate a storm, but it was a yellow warning, and not. It was kind of shown as being over quite a wide area, so there's certainly no warnings as to where the impacts would actually occur. And in the event we had impacts occurring in quite a wide area, and I think the public. Agencies were pretty thinly spread trying to respond to all these events. Stuart can maybe give us a little bit more just on the preparations.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, well, as Peter said, it was a yellow warning we had from the Met Office last financial year. And apologies, we work in financial years as opposed to calendar years. Last financial year we had 35 yellow warnings, and this year to date we've had 37. But out of that 72 warnings, we've only actually had to take any action at all in 3. So to put in place additional resources across the council area, not knowing where they'd be required, on each occasion you get a yellow warning wouldn't actually be a good use of resources. So the fact it was a yellow warning that changed to an amber at 11 at night didn't give us any time to react and put on any additional resources proactively. We did call in additional resources reactively, but again, with the speed of the event, the additional resources we came in could only really go around after the event and see if we could provide some assistance, as opposed to providing any preemptive assistance to residents anywhere. Since the event, there has been another 3 yellow warnings, and on each occasion, just in case, we've put additional resources in place, and nothing's been required. There's been no incidents across the entire council area. So in terms of us putting additional resources on, it is a bit of a hit or a miss as to whether they're required.
Thanks, Stuart. Okay, just moving down then. One for Scottish Water, I think one for you, Gavin. A question about helping to clear a garden in Crieff Road.
Yeah, I mentioned when I spoke earlier that colleagues went door to door calling on residents who we knew had been affected internally or in their gardens, and I think predominantly that was done in Feus Road and up Church Street, which I think was affected by quite significant overland flows down the hill as well. In a broader sense, we're reliant on customers contacting us when they need assistance. I don't know if Ms Simpson has been directly in contact with us, but I'm certainly happy to follow up with her to get clean-up work carried out in the garden in Crieff Road if that's needed.
Great, thanks a lot, Gavin. Okay, next question is, will the council and Scottish Water be carrying out drainage sewerage checks to people's properties to the road? My concerns lie with the potential blockages or even collapsed pipes.
I think that's probably primarily for us. We do monitor how the network's performing in the aftermath of these incidents. Sewer chokes occur in the aftermath of flooding as a result of debris and things finding their way into the network, and that's part of the workload that our sewer response team worked through in the following days after this incident. Generally, beyond that, operational response would be targeted where a problem is reported. There isn't, I think, an obvious reason that the laterals, the sort of small pipes that extend into individual properties would be likely to have been affected. But if there are any residents who have particular concerns about the drains serving their own properties, then we would encourage them to contact us through our customer engagement centre. They can do that online or by phoning 0800 077 8778, and our local team will come out and investigate. But as I say, I think we would generally focus on targeting that where there's a drain that's not performing as customers expect it to, rather than doing that on a blanket basis.
Great, thanks for that, Gavin. Stuart, could you just add about the gullies and things? Will we be out doing additional gully cleans and that type of thing?
We will be checking the gullies. Having been on site when the water started to clear, capacity started to open up in the system, the gullies actually took the water away, which is an indicator that there are no issues with the gullies. We will, however, be out to double check them and cleanse them, and inject and to jet any that we find that are blocked. But from the evidence of having the water that was there in the morning to compare to the water in the afternoon, the gullies took the water away when capacity returned to the system.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Stuart. Mr. Longhorn's got a question again about road closures. I think we've actually covered that question, so I'll move on if that's okay. Next question is, I believe it hadn't been in the street for over 3 hours. My property would have been underwater. In my house, it was under the floorboards. I think that's a statement more than a question. Next one, I called police and were told it is getting worse, but need the traffic stopped. We only get a quick response from the fire brigade who arrived and sat at my drive. I think that again, I think that's more of a comment, and unfortunately the police aren't on the call to provide any response. So if that's okay, I'll move on again. Question from Mr. Peebles. I understand that a flood modelling survey has been ongoing for a few years. How far on has this modelling progressed? With the additional housing within the area, has the modelling shown that the existing pipework in Feus Road isn't adequate for modern day use? Gavin, I think you might have covered that. I don't know if you want to add anything at all.
Yeah, I think rather than repeat myself at too much length, the modelling work that's referred to, which was a joint project taken forward by Scottish Water and the council, was completed at the end of the last calendar year in December 2019. It's a complex and quite intensive piece of work, but it provides a much better foundation for the next phase of work, looking at solutions, with Feus Road being a priority in that. It does identify, as is clearly validated by this event and others, that Feus Road is an area which is susceptible to flooding, with a number of factors contributing to that. It's perhaps worth just taking the opportunity here to say that the investment that we're able to make is sort of guided by a service standard that we aim to have the sewer network achieve, and that service standard is for what's referred to in if you'll forgive me for the jargon, as a 1 in 30 year storm event, or a storm event that there's roughly a 3% chance of happening in any given year, based on the sort of historic weather trends. That therefore doesn't necessarily mean that the investment that we're able to progress will completely remove risk of flooding in very extreme events like this. It will help, of course, but it's important, I think, for us to be clear with residents that unfortunately we can't make the risk of flooding disappear. We can only try to reduce it to the level that we can.
Thanks for that, Gavin. Just moving down then, another comment from Mrs. Garvey, I think, around the traffic flow and the road signs. Again, that seems to be quite a key issue for many people. A further comment from Mrs. Garvey, I think it's a comment as opposed to a question around her property. She's been advised that her property may need to be flooded again to remove 3 inches of dirty mud. Just moving on to another question around a comment really from Mr. Longhorn about the attendance of stakeholders at the meeting today. Apologies, I thought SEPA weren't represented, but I think they are on the call. They're just having difficulties actually with the team system. But we will pass our comments on to any partners that are not here today, so we'll be sure to do that.
Yeah, Mark, can I just say, what wasn't for the want of trying with Flood Forum, SEPA and the police, it's been technical issues, unfortunately, for all of them. They're all trying to get onto the call like mad, but just having difficulties with the system set up, unfortunately. They would otherwise have been on.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. A question from Mr. Longhorn, referring to project work being done to look at solutions. Is there a resident on any project board or involved in that work? Is that something which will happen, or will residents be consulted as part of that work?
I think in response to that, as I mentioned, we anticipate there being a better level of information around the turn of the calendar year in December or January that would allow us to share with residents the emerging design proposal and seek some feedback. I think there's not a resident representative, as far as I'm aware, on the involved with the work of the project team at this stage. It's quite technical work. The council is involved as well as ourselves and consultants. So there are people with a broad range of perspectives. I suspect I'm slightly speaking off the cuff, but I think there would be challenges with having a resident directly engaged in that because of the personal nature of some of the information, and trying to work through options which have different implications for landowners and the like. So it would probably be quite a challenging thing to do in terms of our obligations in managing different individuals' personal information appropriately.
Thanks for that, Gavin. A question stroke comment from Mrs. Garvey. Can the flood protection lady tell me how long my insurance is going to take to make my home and garden the way it was? My husband and I spent £3,500 in lockdown to garden to make it nice for an 86-year-old father to enjoy, who is now responsible for the devaluation of my property. Can anyone make any comments around that?
I think, other than just saying, Mark, that the general responsibility for private property rests with the owner, and obviously, if you're insured, you really expect the insurance company to do a job in trying to get you back to where you were before the flooding. And obviously, we sympathise with people. That is a long and difficult journey. It takes a long time. We're aware of a number of the residents who are either out of their properties or having difficulties trying to get work done and get their properties back into some sort of shape again. We're aware of a few issues caused by COVID with insurance companies. Things are generally taking a bit longer, and if you're struggling a bit, I know the Scottish Flood Forum are very good at helping out with insurance issues. The Flood RE scheme has been set up now by the national government, trying to get affordable flood insurance for property owners. And that's a scheme that's been set up by insurance companies, put money aside so that there is a pot of money for flood insurance to make sure residents get affordable flood insurance. And again, the Flood Forum are very well placed to advise you on that. Great,
thanks for that, Peter. Just moving down, I think Scott is making the same. Well, as that's the same question as an earlier resident. I think we've covered that. Mrs. Simpson is talking about, well, asking a question really, what can she do? She's looking to put flood prevention measures in, but she's being told that that it could spread to another property, it could push water into another neighbouring property. So have we got any advice to Mrs. Simpson around that?
I'm guessing that's in connection with non-return valves. So what quite often happens and Gavin will kind of maybe give you a bit more on this is, and when you've got the wider combined sewer network, which is a lot of water entering it under pressure, maybe higher up the catchment, unfortunately at the low spot where it enters properties, it can force water back up and out the system, so it can come out in sinks and showers and the like. And obviously that form of flooding is pretty awful for people. So you can sometimes fit non-return valves to properties for that, but I think the problem happens where you maybe only fit a few non-return valves and you simply move the problem onto a neighbouring property, and that's maybe something that Scottish Water have highlighted, but Gavin will maybe give a little bit more on that.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I'm not familiar with the specific case, but certainly what you've said is true, that in looking at property level protection and whether that's property level protection that we would install if the sewers aren't meeting the level of service at a customer's property, or indeed if the customer was looking at property level protection themselves to provide protection beyond the level of service that we can offer. There is this issue about transference, and at that level, and indeed with larger scale work to lower flood risk, one of the crucial considerations is making sure that nothing that's done makes flood risk worse somewhere else, which clearly is a challenge of flooding generally. So I think that's likely to be the case, whether through the forum or us, and I'm afraid it's a challenge. I'm not sure there's an easy answer to it. Taking the second half of Ms Simpson's question, which is for Scottish Water as well, again, I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the details of the difficulties that you had in 2018, and I know you've asked about clean up for your garden on this occasion. If you're able to send through details of the case, particularly the current situation, then we'll have a look at that in detail and follow up with you.
Right, thanks, Gavin. Thanks, Peter. Just moving down then, Mr. McFadden has seconded the concerns around the attendance of key stakeholders to tonight's meeting, and we will take that back. Mrs. Garvey has asked the question: I call the council to get the gardens and roads cleaned, and when the staff arrived, I was told number 49 wasn't on the list. I'm not sure anyone will be familiar with that specifically. I think we might have to take that away, unless anyone's got any comments. But we'd have to take that particular concern away and look into that if that is okay. Just moving down, Mr. Peebles again. He's asked, could you clarify that the flood risk management plan, PKC, are looking at a timescale from February 2021 until 2027 to carry out works to drainage on Feus Road if funding is forthcoming from the Scottish Government? Is that for you, Gavin, or is that for you, Peter?
Potentially some combination of the two of us. Peter, do you want to go first?
Well, I think the SEPA's flood risk management strategies and our local flood risk management plans are consistent. SEPA will publish their strategies, I think December 2021. So the dates are about right. We'll have June 2022, and each of those two sort of levels of documents have a 6-year cycle on them. So yeah, the next investment cycle is for themselves is basically from June 2022 to June 2028. And ideally, if we can identify feasible solutions, and obviously Scottish Water have to be on board with that as part of the joint project that's ongoing. If we can get that into the the prioritisation process that happens through SEPA and the Scottish Government and attract the funding, then yeah, that is what we're trying to get to, definitely. Yeah,
so I would echo that. I think one of the challenges in this is that Scottish Water's funding and the council's funding work in slightly different ways, and the effort is to bring these into alignment so that we can work jointly and deliver a feasible solution as early as possible.
Great, thanks Peter, thanks Gavin. Just a few comments I think from Mrs Garvey. Can I just add, my toilet backs up. That's when we know there is a drain issue with water. The water tanker stood outside the post office next to his lorry for over 3-4 hours, then told us the lorry was too small to deal with the water. We were told we weren't allowed to put signs out, only the police could close roads. They weren't around. I think, again, that's certainly a key issue for us to take away and think about how we deal with that. Then a question, comment from 32 Feus Road. In the post-incident bulletin, it highlights that property owners should purchase and operate their own pumps. As Mike from the fire service highlighted, there is nowhere to pump this water to when the infrastructure is overwhelmed. In the medium term, prior to any engineering work, what use is this advice in preventing properties from flooding? I don't know if Mike, you want to comment there. I think my view is certainly in this case it wouldn't have been any help, but that doesn't necessarily mean in other cases it wouldn't be any help, depending on the extent of the flooding.
Yeah, that's right. There has been cases in the instances in the past, when Feus Road has flooded, and we've been able to help by pumping out and assisting occupiers. However, definitely due to the volume of water this time, there was no chance for us to do anything proactive that would have made any difference at all at the time. So yeah, it just really depends on the situation, the circumstances, and the volume of water that's going to be lying on the road. What we can effectively clear to assist people with getting rid of the water within their house, within their property.
Thanks, Mike.
Can I just add as well, Mark? Stuart here. We're the same. We have 6-inch high capacity pumps that shift water, but in Feus Road's case, there is nowhere to pump the water to, because you can't get long enough hoses to get it out of the immediate flood zone. So it is an issue when you get that volume of water. And I was there when the Scottish Water tanker guy was there, and he was looking at the water, and it was too big a volume for him to lift, because he's then got to go far enough away to discharge it into a recognised disposal point that it would then take him. He reckoned it would take him an hour's return trip to go and do all that, and it just wouldn't have impacted on the volume of water that was there. And as I said earlier, the capacity started returning to the sewers around about midday, and that's what took the water away.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Stuart. Another comment from Mrs. Garvey. Not really sure about this one. I have the video showed people on bikes close Unity Terrace 2, and then just a comment thanking people for the help during this very extremely frustrating time, which we do understand. There can't be much things worse than getting your house flooded and standing there and the water coming in, and there's very little you can do. So we do all sympathise, which must be very, very difficult for everyone involved. Just moving on then to another comment from 32 Feus Road. It was only after the fire service response requested that police shut the road at the cemetery end that traffic flow was reduced. The response plan appears not to have worked in this instance. again, the common issue around the road closure. Another common question from Mrs. Garvey: at what point in the night were we to get out of bed and carry out our sandbags over the 6 inches of water in the drive to put by our property? Okay, I think that's more of a comment than a question, or maybe a rhetorical question. Right. Mr.
I think the next one there, Mark, is possibly Cal Rayburn from the Scottish Flood Forum, just pointing out that the Scottish Flood Forum carry out free property level protection assessments for residents, so residents can get in touch with them, and they offer that as a free service.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that, Peter. In terms of Mr. Peebles, who decided that we are now living in a flood area in Feus Road? Having been a resident for 15 years, only in the past 10 years has the flood become more prevalent. I don't know, Peter, if you can comment on that in terms of the flooding and the weather and the changes.
Yeah, we know this really kicked off in 2010, but that was the big flood, and there was also sadly a flood almost a year later in 2011. But having been looking at this for a number of years now, we are aware of events prior to that. They might not have been that serious, but we are aware of events come back for a few years prior to that. So yeah, it's difficult to say why it's suddenly crept up in us and why it's suddenly there. Is it climate change? That's possibly adding to it. Certainly the kind of severity of the storm we had last month certainly explains why this event was particularly severe. So there's maybe a number of factors coming into it. I know a lot of people mention development in the area, but in recent years sustainable urban drainage systems have become a bit of a feature and a legal requirement now. So any new development that goes in has to manage its own surface water within that site and not discharge it, in an uncontrolled manner. So people put storage areas in and storage tanks and that kind of thing, and that's all managed through the planning process now. So yeah, it's difficult to say. There's probably a few factors at play here.
Thanks, Peter. A question or comment from Lynn Simpson. The sandbags Peter mentioned only hold approximately 30 litres of water, which would not have really helped much. I don't know if did the act also as a barrier as well as
exactly that, Mark. Yeah. I think you activate them and they're then meant to act as a barrier. Okay.
Thanks, Peter. And just in terms of Mr. McFadden has asked, will questions that aren't adequately being answered by the Flood Forum, the police and SEPA be answered? I'll just say to Mr. McFadden, if you can put your questions at the end of the chat and we will take them away and we will get back to you with those questions.
Just to say, Mark, we get a full spreadsheet of all the questions that have been asked tonight, and we'll circulate that around all the presenters, including the Flood Forum, the police and SEPA.
Great, thanks, Peter. Okay, another comment from Mrs. Garvey around the road closure. So again, that's a common theme. So we've dealt with that today, I think. Another comment around the sandbags are still out. Mr. McFadden, Feus Road has historically been flooded, so why aren't flood alarms a priority? I don't know.
Sorry, I was being muted and unmuted there. Look, we have a flood alarm at Feus Road, and it has the highest level of priority that we have in terms of operational response. I appreciate in a very widespread impact like this, we will have had high priority flood alarms, I think, in a number of places going off around the same time. But the key factor in our response in this instance was the difficulties that our resources had getting to the site in the midst of the storm with other flooding impacts on the road network. But yeah, there is a flood alarm at Feus Road for precisely the reason Mr. McFadden highlights, and it is the highest priority.
Thanks, Gavin. Comment from Mrs. Garvey: the drain in front of my drive is half full.
I'll get that looked at, Mark. Stuart here. I'll get that looked at. The gullies do sit with water in them because they form a trapped effect so that the smells don't come out of the sewer. So they should sit with water in them, but I'll get it checked out just to make sure that it is fully functioning.
Thanks, Stuart. Just an apology from Carol from the Scottish Flood Forum, who's having a little bit of difficulty in terms of the IT, but thanks for that, Carol. She said she would take this up offline or take any issues up offline. Any questions? Another question from Mrs. Garvey around: my insurance is on board with everything and understands it's up to us to deal with, but if I was to flood protect my property, how can I stop my neighbour's dirty water ending up in mine? I don't. Again, that may be some advice that Carol could provide as part of the ongoing conversations. Don't want anyone else wants to comment on that. We can, or Carol can pick that up. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Just moving down to Lynn Simpson. I wanted to know how I can prevent my garden being flooded if I'm not allowed to put in any prevention. I think she's asked that. I think that's been answered that question further up. But again, as I said, if any of the questions, if people don't feel the questions have been answered effectively, just let us know. A question from Scott, a comment that the owner's responsibility are for their grounds, but when the fault lies from insufficient drainage infrastructure, which is council responsibility, the point has been missed from back up pressure, referring to possible blocks or collapsed piping. I think there's a suggestion there that would it be the council's responsibility for any flooding in any property because the infrastructure isn't sufficient, so the infrastructure outside the person's property backs up and causes a flood in a property. I don't know if someone can clarify that situation. Whose responsibility would it be if the infrastructure outside the property was not sufficient or was damaged in any way? Would that become a responsibility of an agency, or is that still a responsibility of the homeowner?
I think in terms of the drainage infrastructure, Mark, it's kind of jointly the responsibility of Scottish Water and the council. Council been responsible for road drainage in the gullies, and Scottish Water for the main sewer. So that's why we've got a joint project running to try and address that.
Sorry, thanks for that, Peter. Mr. Longhorn, quite a long question here. For the Chair, Council Representative, I appreciate the need for resident responsibility to mitigate the effects of flooding themselves. However, Scottish Water representatives has been kind enough to say that the responsibility for failure of the sewer network lies with them. While there was a higher crisis with stormwater, this flooding is not new and not our fault. Insurance costs, house values and marketability are impacted massively here and are not our fault. The provision of effective drainage is not our responsibility. What will you do to mitigate the increase of costs associated with our properties resulting from the failure of services to meet their responsibilities? I think in terms of that, I think we've responded to that in the sense that we're working, the council and Scottish Water are working together to come up with a longer term solution. I don't know if Gavin or Peter would like to add to that.
I think I would probably just add, Mark, that we understand how frustrating this is and how significant it is for residents, but ultimately Scottish Water is responsible, as I've said, for the sewer network. Ultimately, though, what we're responsible for at the moment is for making the sewer network achieve the level of service that it's supposed to, which we recognise it doesn't at the moment. But in a storm event of this severity, unfortunately, it may not be anyone's fault. It's a product of a rainfall event. and that's why it's not the right thing for us or for the council to come to a meeting like this and say that we can make the issue go away completely, because we can't.
Thanks for that, Gavin. I think it's a comment from Scott. I do see a drop in water bowl level. This is a possible connection to blockage or collapsed pipe. I think that's more of a comment, and I'm not sure if that is a question. Lynn Simpson is saying, back in 2006, after being flooded for the first time, the council said there will be no more development in Perth as the drainage systems can't cope. 2 years later, 100 properties were built in Morris Court. Clearly, Mr. Simpson, I couldn't comment on who made that comment to you or who that was or who gave you that commitment, but I'm surprised if any commitment such as that would be given. And I think, as Peter said, each new development is responsible for its own measures, flood risk measures to put in place. So I don't know if you can give us more information on that, but I would be surprised if anyone would actually give you that commitment.
I can perhaps say something here, Mark, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Gavin.
So again, I don't know the specific commitment that was given and who by, but in respect of the sewer network, Scottish Water has a connections process, the principle of which is that new connections won't be allowed which cause detriment to existing customers' service. So in a situation like Feus Road, if there was development in the upstream catchment, then we would not allow a connection if it was going to make the existing problem with flooding worse as our current processes operate. What can happen is that developers would be required to carry out something called a drainage impact assessment. That sort of uses some of the information now that's been collected through the integrated catchment study. They may be able, through that drainage impact assessment, to identify mitigation that they can deliver to prevent detriment. So that might be delivery, for example, of some surface water removal to offset foul flows, and that might allow them to connect in some cases. But certainly people, I appreciate, will be sceptical, but I can give residents assurance that there are developers who are extremely frustrated because the need to deliver work to address the flooding problem at Feus Road is preventing them from being able to take forward development within the city. So that's another aspect of this problem from our point of view, and I'm sure from the councils too. But the principle is that no connections will be allowed that make the problem worse.
Thanks for that, Gavin. Just moving on then, a question from, or a comment really, from Scott about sandbags were no use, and then a comment around Scottish Water workmen confirmed the drains had not been cleared for some time. So I think there's a suggestion there, Scott, that may, if you feel that may have been the cause of this. I don't know, Stuart, do you want to just comment on that at all?
Yes, in terms of the roadside drains, we aim to cleanse the drains every 2 years, but Feus Road gets an annual cleanse. I couldn't say at this moment in time. We need to check our records when it was last done, but we do have records that I can check and feedback on. Okay,
thanks for that, Stuart. We'll certainly do that. And finally then, Mr. Peebles is just seconding the statement made around the drainage implications, property insurance and the devaluation of properties made by Mr. Longhorn. I think that is the end of the comments or the questions. Don't know if anybody else would like to make a final comment or question before we sort of sum up and move forward.
Mark, it's Stuart here. I maybe should have said when I spoke just a few seconds ago. I'll check when the gullies were last cleansed, but I think the evidence that as soon as capacity returned in the system, the gullies drained the road is evidence that they were operational. And in a situation like that, we could cleanse the gullies on a Tuesday, and with that sort of weather conditions, they wouldn't drain the road until there was capacity in the pipe system the following day. So the cleansing the gullies, whilst it's important, it's not the single factor that would have prevented flooding.
Thanks for clarifying that, Stuart. Okay then, well, I think that is the end of the question and answer session. I really hope residents have found that useful. And as I said earlier, and Peter also reiterated, if individuals or groups want further conversations or further discussions, then we will happily do that. We will have a list of all the questions tonight, and we'll make sure that we've answered all that. So I think hopefully that will be we'll get out that to you. I think we said also that there won't be minutes of tonight's meeting, but the recording will be on YouTube, so people can pick it up that way. I just finally like to thank everybody, particularly the officers from the various agencies, for attending tonight, answering the questions, and providing the presentation. And finally, I would say we really do want to help everyone in this situation. It was an unprecedented event. It was, you know, we do want to learn lessons, but I think it was such a massive event which affected such a large area. There was very little we could do or could have done to prevent the impact that it has had. But we'll certainly go away. We'll certainly review how we went about it and how we work together, so we can look to do better next time. So I'd like to thank everyone, all the residents, for taking time to their valuable time out there even tonight to attend. So I'd just like to thank everybody and wish everyone good night. Thank you.